Hey there, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Alchemi-Culture Podcast. I am your host, Phoenix Aurelius, and today I am joined by Liev Dalton of the Beyond Terrain podcast. Some of you actually may have caught my episode where Liev was interviewing me on there recently, and I just clicked with this guy. I love his mission. I love everything that he's doing. And so I asked him, hey, come on the Alchemi-Culture Podcast. I've got some good questions for him today about terrain theory and his passion for going even beyond just standard terrain theory as it exists today and as it's existed by the eclectics and other folks. And so we're going to dive right into it. Welcome, Liev, to the show, man. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for the kind words. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, man, we're happy to have you, man. I love your passion and your enthusiasm right now for exploring health outside of the box of the allopathic model and even out of like the, they call it functional medicine these days, type of model. I wanted to ask you first, like, what kind of inspired you to create the Beyond Terrain podcast, and how did you kind of get into that whole thing in the first place?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a long journey. I kind of just slowly started getting into health over time. Like, definitely the whole pandemic fiasco kind of pushed a lot of people into looking into alternative ways of understanding. And so I was kind of part of that crew and that wave there. So, slowly just learning over time. And, I really developed this strong inclination to just trying to learn as much as I can. Like, I just really love learning, honestly. And for me at this point in my life, like having conversations with people like yourself and with so many people is one of the best ways that I learn, but I'm also able to share at the same time so other people can learn as well. And they can interact with me through social media and whatever it may be. And so I just felt like the podcast was the perfect way forward for me at this point in my life to learn as much as I can and share at the same time because I'm no expert at this point in my life. I'm still in the gathering phase, and I feel like that may never end at the same time. But, like I'm not going to sit here and make any dogmatic claims. So I really want to get a bunch of point of views and just kind of take it all in and see what we can create in the meantime and just, share at the same time. So that was really the fundamental reason why I wanted to do the podcast.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah, I know for a fact, like my views changed so much during the COVID time. I remember it was roughly November of 2019. And I have, we source a lot of our herbs from China, organic herbs from China, especially, we have specialized in the past in traditional Chinese herbs that we turn into spagyric formulations and spagyric single herbs. And they were telling me and sending me photos like, this is bad, this is coming all over the world, take a look at this, like there are bodies in the street, like they're waiting to be burned. It got really gnarly, and that was in November of 2019. I remember looking at my wife Nori and I said, Nori, before long, if we go out to even get like groceries or something, we're going to be like really at risk of maybe dying here, just based on all the propaganda and photos that they were sending me.
Yeah.
By I think it was March of 2020, Dr. Andrew Kaufman was on the scene. Dr. Tom Cowan was on the scene. Both of them are friends of mine now. At the time, well, actually, Dr. Cowan was already a friend and a client of ours at that time. He stocked our
Wow.
liposomal vitamin C and was looking at having a strophanthus spagyric tincture made for his store, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. And so I got his opinion on things, and I knew that he was already pretty, how shall we say, off the beat of modern allopathy or anything, because I'd read
Yeah.
his book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, which blew my mind.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Heart isn't pumping, it's vortexing, and blood is moving. For those of you in the audience who are like, this is stupid, I'm turning the podcast off now. Keep an open mind, because I had that very same feeling when Dr. Tom Cowan contacted me. He had told me about some of his theories and said, hey, look, the heart doesn't actually pump blood. I've written about it. And I said, do you have any peer-reviewed science behind this? And he said, I find it really ironic that you're an alchemist asking for peer-reviewed science. So anyway, it was a fun conversation. But Andy came on, and Andrew Kaufman came on, and he was all over the place. He was on Crow 777. He was on all these different podcasts. Del Bigtree. And he was saying, you know, viruses basically don't exist. And anybody who wants to refute that they do exist needs to provide proof. So I have, as a medical researcher, thousands of papers, and I sent them to him and said, look, dude, here's how they're isolating, blah, 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 blah. And he said, you're right, Phoenix, this is how they're mentioning it, but let's go through it. And so we went through it. And afterwards, he's like, does that sound like viral isolation to you? I said, no, that's concomitation. If anything, that's like a concomitant recombination, actually, a recombinant DNA. It doesn't sound like isolation at all. And he said, exactly. So this is where I'm coming from. And that led me down a whole different pathway of researching viruses. Now, I still, you know, those two kind of think that there's no such thing as a virus whatsoever. What I'm seeing is that viruses are just epigenetic mutations of DNA based on larger environmental and social patterns. And so they're not particles. And so the way that I view what a virus is more of a spiritual type of emanation. But I guess my perspectives aside, that kind of really woke me up and sent me down an entire pathway of trying to find out, well, what are these things? Because we can't refute really that DNA and epigenetic mutations are happening, because we can see that within individuals that quote unquote have a virus. But what we cannot prove is that it's actually an infectious agent that can be transmissible, or that it's a particle of any sort, right? And so that totally changed my opinion. What are some of the things that you changed your opinions about in health just over the entire COVID thing? Because you're training in psychology and psychiatry right now, right?
Yeah, currently, yeah, I'm doing a master's of counseling psychology actually, and but I did my undergrad in biochemistry. So I did all the biology, the chemistry, and I did a lot of microbiology and virology. Actually, I almost switched into microbiology after I discovered Andrew Kaufman's work, because I thought, this might give me the leg up in understanding. And anyway, it was going to cost me an extra year, and so I decided against it and finished out biochemistry. But yeah, similar, like, I stumbled upon Andrew Kaufman's work, and that kind of sparked a lot of interest in my mind. But I was really coming from this idea of like, you know, viruses and bacteria, there's a lot, like it's a fact, right? I was really in this
Yeah, me
dogmatic way
too.
of thinking, so and I remember when I first stumbled upon, like, I was like, at the time I figured out in March 2020, I kind of stumbled upon this information. So I was fishing lobster at the time, actually, in PEI. And so I was like just gassed. I'd come home, I was so tired, and I'd sit and I'd
Yeah.
watch YouTube, whatever. And so I first stumbled upon, oh, the virus was made in a lab. And I kind of went down that rabbit hole for a couple of days. And I stumbled upon a video, and it was on Andrew Kaufman's channel. It was quotes refuting germ theory. And it was just a bunch of quotes, like, that go against germ theory in general. And so I remember going down on the comment section of that video, and I never do this, like, ever. I left a paragraph of a comment saying, this is so ignorant, and, like, we know the mechanisms. We know the biochemical mechanisms of how viruses enter, like, they enter into a cell, and we understand how microbes penetrate cells, or how they affect the cells, and all of these things. And I was going off, and he had just sent me, he had put a link underneath the comment, and it was sending me to another video. And so that's how I really started. And after I rewatched the video a few times, and I was like, okay, like, this makes sense. This is just making sense. And I really started with viruses. So it was really easy for me, like, to transition into viruses not being a contagion, right? So that was the easiest. But then I thought, oh, viruses aren't a contagion, and they're may not even exist. And maybe, I was on the exosome idea at the time, which may not have too much evidence. But then I
Right.
thought, okay, well, microbes and parasites and virus and or not, sorry, virus, fungus all still cause disease, but viruses don't. So it was kind of a slow transition through it. And after, like, listening to, the visionaries in the field, like Dr. Bear Paul Lando and Andrew Kaufman and Cowan and all these visionaries, like, it kind of just started opening up one by one. And I really got back to the logic and things, and really thinking things through. Like, that was really important. And that's something that I did learn in university, was logic. I took one course, writing for the sciences, in my first year, and it was the most phenomenal course I ever took in my life. And it was all about how to write scientifically, and and analyze papers and use logic. And this stuck with me. There was no dogma whatsoever. It was all deciphering things. So I went back to that, reapplied it to everything that I learned, and then it was clean slate. I really had to look at everything from a fresh slate. And so just everything in general. Now I look at everything in a new light. So when I look at viruses, bacteria, fungus, and parasites, now to me it's obvious that they don't cause disease. Now I know such a bold statement to make, but it took me a while to get. I've been studying this for almost maybe 4 years now, right? So um, and I read through the papers and I applied logic and it just wasn't there. And so same thing with the heart not being a pump. That one, even after I was like, okay, germ theory is false. That one I was still like, well, there's no way, we know that, but I gotta come back and I gotta look at it from like a fresh perspective and think, okay, so the mathematics do not align with the heart being solely a pump. The pump would have to be the size of a building to be able to pump the blood through the vessels of the body, through the kilometers and kilometers of the vessel of the body, through the capillaries, which are smaller than the red blood cells themselves. So the amount of force that it would take to do this, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And you got to get back to the basics, back to the logic, back to the mathematics, back to the very basics. And so that was really foundational for me. It was always getting back to the basics and questioning things with a fresh perspective. And so I learned a little bit about alchemy on the way there too. And so that was actually really helpful for me. And, I'm very much a beginner in the alchemical sciences, but, that was a very helpful thing to be able to look at things like that because the as above, so below is such a helpful thing in my mind, right? Because,
It is.
bacteria don't cause disease. Well, then maybe the fundamental cause of a parasitic infection, we call, isn't actually the parasite. Maybe it's the parasite is there because you have all of this buildup in your gut and you have a toxic gut lining or, the poor mucous membrane and maybe your your microvilli in your gut. Maybe the cells are not intact. Maybe you have a leaky gut. Maybe there's all these things that have been caused by our environment, by the terrain, that it's not actually, these little microbes or these little microorganisms coming in and infiltrating us. And, and to me now, it just absolutely makes no sense. It doesn't make sense that there'd be an organism on this planet to take down another organism completely. Like, and one of the quotes I remember is that if the germ theory were to be true, there would be no one around today to be able to believe it, because it would have wiped everyone out. It would have wiped the germ theory. It should wipe everyone out. There shouldn't be this, these immunities. Some people are immune and some people aren't immune. And, it doesn't make any sense to me at this point. You could look at a lion in the environment, and maybe I'm rambling a little bit here, but if you look at a lion in the environment, when it kills another animal, it's not like it's killing all of the animals. It's part of a delicate balance of nature. So the lion we perceive as a predator, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just part of the delicate balance of nature.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that was really, really important for my understanding. So yeah, a little bit of detail there, but pretty much everything changed. I really had to look at everything from a fresh perspective. And there's a lot of things that the modern way does well. And, you know, our conversation on my podcast was so profound for me. Like, well, I left there and I listened to it again and I listened to it again because like your ideas really just opened up my mind again. It was like instead of hating the modern way of studying everything individually, why don't you embrace it and love it and take all of these sparse fields of everything so individual and bring it back together and make one whole thing. And it's almost like my new mission, right? Like of holism, like with my podcast. Like I want to bring everything together, every single aspect of life, and I want to bring it together in the most holistic manner possible. That is really like it was really fundamental for me. So, there's a lot of fundamental principles in there that I mentioned, but yeah, anyway, I'll give you the floor again here.
Well, that's really humbling to hear, actually, because yeah, my views on things. So you were talking about like bacteria and microbiological agents, quote unquote, of disease in the modern kind of allopathic way of looking at things. I had started to be broken down from that idea through IDF work, through all of the intrinsic data field analysis that at that time when I was introduced to these ideas, I wasn't the one performing the analysis. I was working with one of my colleagues named Richard Kirby, and we had taken on a bunch of different clients and monitored their wellness through IDF analytics for 13 months, and then used IDF analytics and spagyrics to be able to see if we could identify root causations of imbalances that we felt were causing their conditions. And we just were performing deep clinical research that way. Now, Richard came back to me at a certain point and he said, hey, look, every time that I'm finding bacteria, I'm finding fungi. Every time I'm finding fungi, I'm finding parasites. And every time I'm finding parasites, I'm finding heavy metals. It turns out that there's more even than just heavy metals that I was able to find later through my own analysis. But it was like, oh, well, what happens if we try and approach the heavy metals? We approached the heavy metals. I made a formula called Heavy Metal Detox RX, and then we also created an IDF balancing broadcast protocol. And suddenly people were passing parasites like 2 or 3 days after we started sending those broadcasts, but we weren't even ever meaning to attack the parasites in any way, shape, or form. We were just going after the heavy metals. And that led me to think that there is an environmental thing, just like what happens in the soil. Like, for instance, if the soil is toxic, then certain types of bacteria, fungi, archaea, multiple different types of microbiological organisms will spontaneously appear in a very short period of time. And the result of them being there for a short period of time does result in some form of extra toxicity, because, it's like the parasite excretes a waste, and that waste is toxic. So here come the fungi, and they're like, hey, we can handle that. And they start to break apart that waste. But then the fungi themselves have waste. And so it's like, oh, okay, now we have, aflatoxins, now we have, et cetera, and then we start to see certain bacteria come in, and then they break down that waste. And then we see archaea come in behind that, and then they break down that waste. But then the archaea oftentimes produce, methane. And so we will see, methanogens inside of gut in microbes. People, they used to just diagnose this as SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Now they're realizing 90% of the time it's not bacteria anyway, it's actually archaea, and they're these methanogen producing archaea, and they're at the very end of the line. It's like all these other things had to be in place. So that was kind of the thing that was easy enough for me to see around terrain. There are some things, though, because I always look to nature. In the alchemical tradition, Michael Meyer, who's a famous Rosicrucian, kind of created the very first, it's called Atalantifugians. He came up with like the first multimedia slideshow is, compositions and woodblock prints wheeled out onto stage as this orchestra of, vocal music accompanies this woodblock print, and then people like stare at that woodblock print until the song is over, and then a new one is wheeled out and a new orchestral composition kind of comes in. Really, really beautiful music too. I love Atlantifugians. But he has in there, one of the slides is following in nature's footsteps. And it's this beautiful woman who is partially disrobing as she's, walking along this pathway. And then this philosopher with like these kind of biscopic glasses and a little lamp in his hand, like trying to see where the footpaths are and trying to follow behind her. And this always really stuck with me really, really deeply, because I experienced this around the very same time that I realized that Spagyria was part of the alchemical tradition. I got really deep into Rosicrucian work. And so it's like, okay, following nature's footsteps. If nature can't teach me, like nature taught me how to distill, I sit around and I watch on a warm day how various water systems will slowly evaporate and turn into clouds and then become so dense that they again fall back into liquid. And it's like, that is the very same principle that I can use for distillation. I was able to see the alchemical processes by watching nature very, very intently. One of the things that I have noticed, and this is going to be highly controversial, so even a lot of people don't like this, but there is this thing about taking environments or things from certain environments to other environments that itself is a cause of epigenetic disharmony or we can even call that dis-ease or disease, right? For instance, the American chestnut was the tallest of the trees in the entire Appalachian range of North America, as far as I know, but definitely within the range of the United States, of Appalachia within the United States. And some Japanese, in the late 1800s, some Japanese chestnut trees were brought over, and they had a particular interaction with these trees that created a blight that within a period of 50 years completely obliterated all of the American chestnuts throughout the entire United States region. And there was nothing anybody could do to save them. Now they're trying to take Asian chestnut trees and American chestnut trees and breed them together, and then take that child and then breed it back with the original American chestnut so that it develops a genetic resistance to that blight. And I don't know how I feel about that. The jury is out right now. I don't understand enough about how I feel about that solution. Inherently, there's something that doesn't sit right, but that could just be my own ignorance or lack of understanding at this point. But I still see that when we introduce things from one environment to another, it ends up creating disease. Do you have Irish blood as well, Liev?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, me too.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things is that the Irish, especially after about 1700, we became very, very, very dependent upon potato crops because of the English relinquishing us to only being able to grow potatoes on our farms, right?
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is that most of us that eat potatoes now have a trauma-based epigenetic response to those potatoes. We love them, and our bodies don't work with them very well. They're a Peruvian thing. They came all the way from Peru, from the New World. They didn't even reach Ireland until, about the 1700s. And during the famine, we survived on them. Now think about how much the limbic system and the neurology of the body is going to relate to the trauma and the suffering and the epigenetic environment of what is being provided. When that's the only source of food and comfort, you are forced to turn to it, but it's also associated with all of that trauma. And that continues from generation to generation to generation to generation. So here we have it that even today, if you go to Ireland, you go to a chippy, you get plastered, have a couple of pints and go to the chippy, and you end up getting yourself in America, we would call that a plate of fries or whatever else. Fries and a curry is chips and a curry is oftentimes what they will do. But that drives this trauma response. And if you take a look at the entire Irish mentality, whether members like us of the diaspora or in Australia as well, right? Or you take a look at people in Ireland today, it creates these conditions, largely skin conditions for us, where we are more susceptible to rosacea and dermatitis and psoriasis and eczema and all these other things that, as far as I can tell, actually have a neuro-emotional component to them, because it's not the food itself. We didn't experience those things in the 1700s. We didn't experience those until the actual, famines, which there's plenty of food. It was just being extradited by the by the British. But so yeah, at any rate, this kind of trauma response keeps going, and I think that has a huge part to do with the terrain. So anyway, I just wanted to see, do you have any ideas or any thoughts on that whole thing, or have considered any of that inside of your work at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the focus, but it's super interesting that you bring that up, because you're seeing this dysbiosis when we introduce things almost artificially, right? It's not like nature necessarily intended us to bring over European whatever organisms to North America. That's a long stretch of water that protects these ecosystems, and they're very different.
Yes.
Now, it's very interesting, right? Because we have this homogeny between the continents as well, or even like latitude, longitude, all these different factors play a significant role in this. that separate the ecosystems, right? Like, but there's this
Yeah.
homogeny. So we have bears, we have, grizzly bears and black bears, and then up north there's polar bears, and then which are pretty close to, the anyways, we all have all these homogenous beings, right? Like
Yes.
we have mackerel in the Gulf of St. Lawrence here. We have mackerel that are a foot long. That's a pretty big mackerel. That's a good sized mackerel. But there's Spanish mackerel in the Pacific Ocean that get up to meters long, right? There's shark mackerel. There's different types. So it's, yeah, that's a very interesting point that introducing these kind of have a dysbiosis. So what, because yeah, it's not necessarily native to that terrain. And so when I
Yeah.
think of things like the diet that we should eat, I'm not going to sit here and say that there's a standard diet, especially if you read Weston A. Price's work.
Right.
Weston A. Price went and studied all the natives from around the world. They all ate a different diet, but they all had perfect teeth. They all had perfect health. They all had community and all these other things as well. But they all ate different things. Like
Yes.
in the Aborigines in Australia, we're eating rodents, right? But up north in like northern Canada or northern North America, right? They were eating nothing but seal blubber and
Ew, whale,
red meat and
narwhal. Yeah.
right. That's all they would eat, right? So you have these very different diets, and I think it's important to look at to eat locally. I think that's a really important factor. You need to eat locally. But we have this other interesting thing about us that now we're scattered around the world. So if your ancestral roots go back to China and you're living in North America, well, what do you eat? Do you eat stuff that's local to what your ancestors ate or where you are locally now? And this is a question I toy with a lot, and I think it always just comes down to balance again,
Yeah.
because we do have the ability to adapt very quickly to our environment. We're able to adapt. But at the same time, we don't adapt that quickly in some ways, right? Because it's like if I go down to and live in, near the equator, well, I'll get tanned, but I'm not going to be like absolutely melanated to where I'm very black, right? And so it's not that quick, but how many generations will that take? We don't know that either, right? Like, so we can adapt to a certain extent to our environment, right? Because I will get a tan, and I tan very well, and like, I'm part Irish and Scottish, but I'm also part French and a little bit of native too. So it's like I have a little bit of that. So
Same.
we're so diverse now. It's like what do we do, right? What do we do? What
No.
do we do about diet and lifestyle? And then it's like now is there just a collective diet? Now is there a collective lifestyle that is fundamentally good for everybody? And I just say, yeah, it's getting back to nature. So it's like doing what calls out to you. I live here in Nova Scotia now, and half of my family's been here for generations, and my Scottish ancestors, my grandmother, she just came off the boat from Scotland. So 25% of me is Scottish off the boat, but the other 75% has been here for 4 or 5 generations, and part of me has been here for 10,000 years. So
Yep.
it's like, and do we even have to look at it like this? Do we even have to look at it from the genetic standpoint? Because it's like if we didn't have the technology we have today, you wouldn't look at it this way. But then at the same time, we wouldn't be in this situation and not have, it's
I
kind of
know.
weird to really speculative, right? It's
It
like
gets very
it's a
convoluted at a
great thing
certain
to
point.
ponder on. Sorry, what's that?
I said it, yeah, it just gets really convoluted at a certain point
Yes.
because we don't all the best we can do at the present moment in a lot of ways is just to ask questions, and to
Yeah.
say, what happens, so there are certain types of common allele expressions that you'll see in certain populations that predispose them to certain conditions or diseases by medical literature. I was just reading the other day about people in Cuba and Puerto Rico and the Caribbean who were Pan-African peoples who have adapted to that location. We can see that in, say Angola, where a huge portion of the Portuguese slave trade in particular came from, when they would come and drop people off on these various islands and sell them at slave markets and whatever else, we would see that Angolan people today have a very common allele expression. Then we'll see that the Caribbean peoples, who are largely of Angolan descent, have a different allele expression that creates a predisposition to disease, because now they are eating, different types of tubers and roots and other things that are Caribbean, or that actually came from South America and were introduced to that kind of Caribbean environment, and so on and so forth. So we see some very, very interesting types of things. And it's like, where do we start with understanding, did the allele expression change because of the trauma? Because that's, there is a huge genetic link between trauma and emotional work, and neurology, I guess we could refer to that as, and psychology, as it pertains to our epigenetic surrounding. So, that's the best that we can do. I think, I've started to scrape away with some intrinsic data field analysis at this, but literally that's all that it is. And it's so non-definitive that I can't say one way or the other what's going on. But I don't think that it's a healthy thing. And I do think that a lot of our world's, what we are now referring to as climate crises and other things, is actually as a result of having homogenized the world to such a degree that races are indistinguishable to a large degree because of interbreeding. And a lot of that was used as a weapon.
Absolutely.
Interbreeding was used as a weapon for centuries, millennia even. And then we also have, the introduction of certain plant and tree species and other things going into areas where they're not native to, and that changes the whole ecology, that changes the way that the animals relate to things. It introduces new foods or new poisons to the thing, that introduces different bacteria and fungi and all. I mean, we have literally tampered with nature through, for lack of a better term, through an imperialist mindset of just like, bring this here, it's good, what's good for business is good for the earth type of thing. And wow, I don't know if we can fully reverse, or whether we need to reverse, but we definitely need to find time to integrate, I think, because that might be a big part of the epigenetic link here, is that we are still practicing business as usual. And it's like, whoa, actually, we need to like sit down and process what has really happened to us individually and what has happened to the world as a whole. And before we get too big for our britches and go completely global, which we're on the brink of right now, it's very important that we think about and understand these things, because we can be creating our own destruction very easily. So I don't know, it's hard to say, but what I can say is that whether it's due to just our solar positioning or galactic positioning, or whether it's due to other space weather concepts, or whether it's due to things that we are doing, like, it seems obvious to me actually that like, if you burn materials that have high amounts of heavy metals and toxins inside of them, that can't be healthy. Whether that is necessarily changing the weather patterns, I don't think so. I think that's more HARP and cloud seeding and other things that are redistributing these kind of global warming type of nonsense that they try and push down our throats. There's so many things that are happening with contamination of water and soil, and have for hundreds of years now, that it seems to me that those are the things. If water, soil, and air are polluted, those are kind of the three basics, the sulfur, mercury, and salt, really, of the earth. And if we continue to tamper with those and pollute those, all things are created from those things. You're going to create toxic people, toxic conditions, and what happens when there's toxicity, disease will follow. So I don't know, just ideas, I guess, that I'm throwing out there. There's not a particular question in that, but I'd like to get your ideas on the matter.
No, I do want to say, I think that there is an argument that local fresh food is very good for you. I think fresh food is good for you. And, I'll touch on the climate in a moment here, but the fresh food is good for you, not because it saves the environment. I'm not even going to go there. I think that when it's fresh, it contains a higher energy. And this kind of gets into the quantum biology of things, which I'm not well versed in, but just recorded a podcast on the topic, actually. Where, you can measure the food. People measure food by the amount of biophotons, or the amount of light that it emits, and these things. So fresh food obviously has a higher frequency. So I think that that is a good argument in favor for eating locally. So I want to address that point. The other thing was Weston A. Price. He did observe that if you were a native of a certain area and you consume the modern diet, the children would come out with facial deformities. And I'll put this as brief as possible. Now, if the children who had the facial deformities, where the teeth were crooked and all of this stuff, switched back to eating a native diet, their deformities didn't go away. But in one generation, their children had perfect teeth as long as that individual, even though they had the facial deformities, switched back to the native diet and native way of life, their children had perfect teeth. So I think that shows a sliver of evidence that, you know, we can adapt very quickly to our environment. And so I am leaning towards, it's best physically to live where you live, right? Now, collectively and mentally, it's a whole different story, right? Because you were talking about collective trauma and how this gets passed down transgenerationally and all of this stuff is that is a hot topic too. Um, so that's a different story. So I think I would separate them there, because definitely working back in your mind and working on the collective and even the sub collectives is can be a very healing thing. But that's kind of a topic for another discussion. Yeah, and as for the climate thing, we've misattributed the problems with things like burning gasoline or burning petrol, right? We say it's the CO2 is the problem. Well, we
Uh,
know that trees and plants and all do much better when CO2 levels are higher.
yep.
So who cares about the CO2? To be quite honest with you, I don't care about CO2. I do care about their raining down beryllium and aluminum from jet planes, and our cars are producing cadmium and they're producing all of these heavy metals that we don't talk about it. We don't talk about heavy metal toxicity. We don't talk about source. Well, in the alternative health field, they do a little bit more, but
Yeah.
um, even then, it's like we can go back to parasites, and there's this huge body of evidence now that parasites love to consume heavy metals, right? And so it's we we're focused on the wrong thing, and we had a great chat with this. Actually, I had a great chat with Derek Nance about this, and it's like they're taking advantage of the people who care, right? The people who care about
Yeah.
the environment and they're out there fighting. They're fighting for the environment, saying CO2 is bad for us. Don't hate that person, right? Because
Yeah.
like they're just misinformed, and that sounds so pretentious of me to say, but it's like they've just been fed this line and they're just repeating the line, and their benevolence and their kindness and their caringness has just been taken advantage of.
Yes.
They care about the environment and they care about the future and they care about, I care about all that stuff too. Like I feel like I'm borrowing the world from my children at this point, so I'd like to leave it in a better place than when I came into it. And I feel like this is what a lot of these environmentalists do. Now some of them don't do jack squat except for sit in front of the highway and block traffic, and those people are absolutely useless. But the people out there who are actually doing something for the climate, whether it's working for a non-for-profit company, volunteer, whatever it is, these people, they're good-hearted, right? And they say CO2 is the cause of climate change. Whatever. They're picking up garbage too on the side of the road, and like, what do we do with the garbage? We go put it in the landfill. Is condensing it all better? I don't know. Probably not. We gotta. This is a very major issue, but it definitely doesn't start like it does start at the individual, because if we all collectively improve our habits and consume less plastic and less, heavy metals, containing items and all this stuff, it does start there. But at the same time, like it's disheartening, because if the companies don't change their scope, which they won't because they're driven by profit and greed, um, it's it's going to take a long time or a collapse to change this. So it's kind of a big topic. It's difficult. I do my part and I do what I think's right, and the environmentalists do what they think's right. And if they want to fly less and they want to drive their car less and drive a bike, that's fine. Whatever. I don't care. Like I'm gonna fly in a plane. Like they had the COP. What was it? COP 28, the climate action plan,
Oh yeah, yeah,
whatever
yeah.
it was. And, everybody flies in their private jets and they fly in, and
I
it's so
know.
funny, right? And they all sit down and then they talk about CO2 being a problem. It's just like this
I
is just
know.
a joke, honestly.
Oh, it's complete joke. Well, and here's the thing. CO2 wouldn't be a problem if we didn't deforest most of the world's forests, including the Amazon, the boreal forests, the Siberian forest,
Yes.
and same with all of the fires. And in fact, to tie this all back to disease and to I can't call it a philosophy yet. It's kind of ideas in progress.
Sure.
But what I was able to show around COVID-19 was that disease immediately followed 5 years of massive global wildfires everywhere. And as you cut back on the amount of trees that are able to convert CO2 to oxygen, now you have hypooxygenation or hypoxia. And COVID-19 was the people who were at risk of dying from it. It was a
Mm,
hypoxic condition, wasn't it? And so
hmm.
that was the link that I was able to find through all of my IDF research, is that once we make global and local conditions unsuitable, the organisms that are dependent upon those larger macrocosmic ecological systems have to adapt, because they can't just die out. That's not what we do. We adapt, right? And so it's like, oh, we have a lot less oxygen now. And so the ACE2 systems in particular, all of the ACE systems, but ACE2 systems now, which are lungs, gallbladder, liver to a smaller degree, spleen, kidneys, etc., those need to adapt to the different changes because there is less oxygen available and being produced. And so that epigenetic adaptation to the environment, I think, could be one of the missing links that we're still, as a society, not really looking at. So that's why I bring it up, is that I think these things, they all go hand in hand. It's like the butterfly effect everywhere with everything. And I think that that's really the source of where health starts. And if you go back to the Vedas, right, they all say that it's like consciousness and awareness of everything that you're doing is what ultimately ends up creating health and living in the most conscious and healthy way possible, given
Hmm.
the circumstances. So
Yeah,
interesting concepts at the very least.
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Maybe like us, you're not too hip on all the wireless radiation penetrating us all the time and disorienting the harmonious state of the natural world. The World Health Organization even admits that cell phone radiation is a Class B carcinogen, and the scientific studies of the deleterious effects of wireless radiation on health grows larger each day. But Bioarch discs structure the radiation that's around us, rendering it harmless and even beneficial according to the tests that we and some others have run on them. Bioarch discs come in 3 sizes: small for cell phones, tablets, computers, and personal electronics, medium for Wi-Fi routers, large televisions, and other household electronics, and large for entire rooms, computer server stations, and other large-scale needs. We have a Bioarch disc on all of our tablets, phones, computers, electrical devices, hell, even on our fridge and our Wi-Fi router. Using our tri-field EMF meter here at the Research Academy, we've shown that the RF frequency, the standard and weighted magnetic fields, and the standard and weighted electrical fields are all drastically reduced back into safe zones using this simple invention. For a limited time, you can get 4 small Bioarchs for your personal electronics and 1 medium Bioarch for your wireless modem or router for only $164.79 with free shipping when you order the Bioarch family pack using the affiliate link on our website. Visit phoenixaurelius.org, click on the Media tab, and then scroll down to the Alchemi-Culture Podcast page. Then, just click on the Bioarch Family Pack and order yours today. As with all the links on our podcast page, this company offers us a small percentage of sales to help fund our research and make this podcast a possibility. So go ahead, get your Bioarch disc today and start structuring the radiation in your environment.
And on the topic of forest fires, I want to make a comment on that.
Please, I've
Um,
been informed.
now, so I planted trees for a year there in Northern Ontario. That was very
Good
difficult
work.
work, very difficult work.
Yeah.
But we talked a lot about forest fires because I planted in a lot of burns. Now, there's this idea that um, that all these forest fires are like some plot and some big conspiracy theory. I don't subscribe to that at all. I don't. I really don't, because 90 I can't remember the exact number. It's above 95% of wildfires are started by people like flicking cigarettes or mismanaged bonfires and things like this. That is like when I was playing, it was the hymn like of the tree planters. It was, if you're smoking a cigarette, you put it in your pocket. Like people would come home with cigarettes or joint butts, whatever. There were a bunch of stoners and stuff too out there. They come home with pockets full of butts, right? Like
Yeah.
because that was like, you can't be doing that. People, they saw it happen. We had water on site at everywhere we planted. There was water on site to put out little fires, and that stuff happens. Now there is an aspect of this where it's mismanaged forests, and it's so
Yes.
funny because I was talking to a fella there the other day, and he recommended me a book, and I don't remember the name of the book, unfortunately, but it was talking about how even before colonizers came over, Native Americans in North America were managing forests, and there's evidence that they were actually burning, having controlled burns as well. So, we've certainly got away from managing forests properly. Now, should we burn every forest down? No, but like where I'm from in PEI right now, we had a big hurricane there last year, knocked all the trees over. Well, all the trees are sitting in the forest on the ground, drying out, getting ready for a fire,
Yep.
right? Same thing. I'm in Nova Scotia here. Last spring, I was evacuated from my home because there was a forest fire that burned through my neighborhood. And fortunately, it just missed my home by about 100 meters. I can walk to the burn site. I'm literally surrounded by it. Took out about 200 and some homes, but it was mismanaged. The forest, there was no management. And it was like, I kind of have an in, and I shouldn't say too much, but I know who caused the fire, you know? Like
Wow.
I have a connection with somebody who knows the exact cause, who has a video of it actually starting. So, and it was man-made. It was just somebody who had a bonfire. It was a really windy night. They didn't put the bonfire out correctly, and it lit the forest up. So a lot of this stuff, like, we can, like, people get distracted by conspiracies, and I
Yes.
think that's really problematic sometimes. And now I'm not going to comment on like Hawaii and the Maui situation. People have their like, I don't know. I don't care. I don't look into that stuff anymore. I really try to get away from that because like what you're saying here is like the is so important. That how does this all tie into disease? And I even think the mentality towards these things ties into disease, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like if you're just going to be concerned about conspiracy theories all the time and who's destroying your life, well, it's going to be your life will be destroyed. You're going to speak
Yeah.
that into existence, and that plays a major, major role in disease, right? So it's about being sure and about being about like it's about building your strength up too, building your mind and your strength up, and living and not thinking about death and not thinking about bad things. Just live and
Yeah.
do good things. So I'm a little off topic here, but
But you're not, because it's
certainly,
all tied in. It's all tied in.
yeah, and certainly, and I've listened to Dr. Bear Paul Lando speak about how the collective consciousness. He talks about how the collective consciousness can actually influence and you might be able to comment on this, influence like the climate, right? How now we have an increase of fear, and we have an increase of all this stuff, and maybe that's why there's so many forest fires. That it makes people careless, and they light up, and there's mismanaged fires, and there's more hurricanes, and there's more whatever. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, right? But I would certainly think, and it makes sense to me, that the collective could certainly impact the environment and nature in general, because it's a very, very powerful thing, the collective. When a lot of people believe something, um, it's very, very powerful. Like that's why religion is so popular, because you have so many people believing in one thing. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. All
Yes.
of these people are believing this one thing, and it's so powerful. You can feel that energy. And so when you go through COVID and 90% of the population is believing this one thing, and their fear, and it's all fear, and they're
Yeah.
scared, and they're worried about grandma dying. Well, grandma's gonna die. If you're gonna think like that, if you're gonna be so scared of getting sick, you're gonna get sick. I didn't get sick through COVID because I was so headstrong. This is the only reason I didn't get sick through COVID, because I was so headstrong that I was not gonna get sick. But I didn't get sick. I really think that was it. Obviously my habits were really good during COVID, and um, even sometimes I'd get bogged down by the idea, oh, well, we're being controlled, and this whole COVID, all the elites are pushing this pandemic onto us, and it's all this. And it bogs your mind down, and it's no way to think, and you almost get stuck in this state of inaction, and that is so unhealthy. Now I've been focused on living. I've been focused on doing things like doing things, literally just doing anything, living and experiencing. And that's what actually led me to start the podcast, tying it back into the first question you asked me. It's like, you know, once I stop focusing on what other people are doing and poor me and the elites are controlling my life and I got to pay taxes and the government's ruining my life and they're putting all these, who cares? Just live your life and do what you think is best for yourself and your family and your community. And, once you start at that level, then you can start worrying about bigger issues like climate change or whatever you want to worry about. But you got to get the fundamentals down. You got to get the fundamentals down. And this is when I think of health, it's total responsibility of every aspect of your life. You know, it's like, don't blame a microbe, don't blame the bacteria or parasite or anything. Blame the fact that you're living in a city that you chose to do and you're outside breathing in the fumes of a car, right? You need to look at things truthfully to also be able to heal truthfully and to heal honestly. And so that plays a big thing. It's about total responsibility. It's about like in every aspect. Because if you're not going to take responsibility for your financial life, well, you're going to end up broke. Well, there's no point of being broke. There's really not. You know, you like there's no point. People in the alternative community and the spiritual community, they hate money. I don't know why they hate money.
I know.
Money is a form of energy.
They hate it
You
because
got
they
to
have
look
a
at it
bad
from a different
relationship
lens. So
with it.
yeah, like it's so anyway, I'm a little off topic here, but at the same time I'm on topic. So
Yeah, exactly. You can't
I want to
go
hear what you think.
say that again.
I want to hear what you think now.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, yeah, there were a couple of interesting points that you brought up, especially around the forestry and mismanagement. Here we have we had many more tribes than just this and many more bands of tribes than just this, but by the time reservations got set, we had 5 primary reservation dictated tribes, legal tribes established by the United States, which was Ute, Goshute, Paiute, Shoshone, and Navajo. And in their respective regions, every single one of them managed the forests by burning out all of the underbrush in controlled burns every single year. And also where we live, there's 360 degrees of mountains all the way around us. This is known as the Wasach Front, the Wasach Valley. And as a result, toxins always build up here because there's this inversion that happens just of air in general. Now, by the time pioneers showed up, they got rid of all of the native grasses that were here. There were grasses that were like 6 to 10 feet tall. They had mowed all of those down with their cattle, and they brought cattle in instead of bison. Bison used to be here. Different types of things like this that completely altered the terrain. But then in order to stay warm, now you have all these, deforestation in order to build the cabins of the trees that did exist. And then we also had the transplantation of grasses that were more ideally suited towards the European cattle. And an increase in methane, of course, as a result of that to some degree, even though that's very small and negligible. There was still that. And then the driving out of the bison in the 1800s, mass rounding up all of the bison here in the United States and just slaughtering them. So we don't have constant ruminating animals anymore on the scale that we would have, which created the best fertilizer for the land imaginable. And we just changed the entire thing. And then now we have smokestacks of chimneys, just blowing out smoke, and coal processing and other things with the introduction of the Mormons here. And so all these things create a tremendous amount of exhaust that in the wintertime, we have the worst air in the entire nation. Because the temperatures never get hot enough in the winter in order to allow that to leave. So we depend upon snowstorms, and we have red air days about, I would say, 80% of the time during the winter. It's been a few days since it snowed here, and it is absolutely awful out there. In fact, my visibility, I can usually see the mountains on the west side. We have a beautiful view of the entire west side, beautiful sunset. But it looks like just post-apocalyptic out there right now. And this will continue until the next snowstorm. So That's one thing that I see, is that when we're not managing systems properly and utilizing resources disproportionately to what the environment holds. Now, by the way, let me bring up this point. The Native Americans that were in this area, especially where I'm at, that would be in the northwest band of Goshoot, that primarily were in this area. They thought that the pioneers were absolutely nuts for living here in the winter. They were like, nah, we leave. In the summers, we go up into the mountains because it's cooler and it's more temperate and there's a lot more wild foods and good hunting. And then we'll come down here for the fall because it's beautiful and we're at lower elevation. So things are a little bit warmer and we can get the last little bits of food and trout and whatever else that we need. And then we leave again and we go up north to areas that are flat and not encircled by these mountains in order to be able to live, because even in their time, just burning, woods and whatever else they would have done in order to keep teepees, wigwams, etc. And most of them actually lived in grass huts at that time before the pioneers came. They had to use fuels as well. And they noted that like the air just gets terrible in the winter. So you guys are like absolutely crazy. That's very unhealthy. And here we are now, California has moved in, Texas has moved in, and this whole valley in the last 5 years has just exploded. There's more people than ever before. And even though, gasoline, diesel fuels are arguably much cleaner fuels than wood in terms of the exhaust that is being emitted, it all adds up. It all adds up. And we get really sick, really toxic conditions here. And, of course, they're like, oh, I wonder why lung cancer, is it a greater, disproportionate thing in the Wasatch Front? It's like, guys, it's really obvious here. But to go back to land management, it takes people living in wild areas. And this is something that we really need to understand from an ecology standpoint, I think, is that even if it's only seasonally, people need to be migratory peoples through certain areas in order to be able to steward and take care of those things. Bushes, all of the underbrush is usually what creates forest fire risk. It's not the trees themselves, usually. It's all of the undergrowth and all of the underbrush that gets so crowded that is basically just a tinderbox waiting to happen. And when you have peoples taking ruminating animals through there, just like Alan Savory has showed in Africa, we're able to take ruminating animals through that area. We're able to steward the animals, which are the food source and which are the forest. And so when you say, like taking accountability and taking responsibility for everything, that is, to me, that is the innate and beautiful capacity of the human organism. It's the only thing that, as far as I can tell, truly distinguishes us from the rest of nature. Two things: the inner fire, the ability to use logic and rationale to be able to understand processes, and then to be able to replicate nature's processes to work with her. We have, as human beings, that capacity. So we're not just the subject of our environmental surroundings. We can become the environment and the environmental surroundings if we utilize our logic and our capacity in that way. And I think that, when I created Alchemi-Culture back in 2012, the entire philosophy, that was what it was all based around, was that single concept of human stewardship, that we are here. And because we have this innate and unique capacity in nature, because it's not language, it's not tools, it's not, the more that we understand about nature, a lot of different animals have language, even if it doesn't sound exactly like ours. A lot of different animals are using tools, like even, primates sticking sticks and whatever else into ant holes in order to, okay, so tools and opposable thumbs, okay. All these things don't really set us apart from the rest of nature. What does is our innate ability to understand and to replicate processes that we can see and to adapt in a very quick way. And it seems to me like such a squandering and such a waste of the human potential to not be utilizing that for a sense of collective and individual goodness, but to be able to use it instead for the sense of collective predation and Yeah, I don't know. When I take a look historically, that's what I see pervading everything, is a sense of predation instead of a sense of stewardship. And that simple switch of scarcity mindset, which is what creates predation usually in human individuals, that sense of scarcity, sense of lack, sense of fear, sense of lower vibrational states of existence. And when I say lower vibrational, some people are going to say, "Oh, wow, he's really woo-woo." No, we can actually show that they operate at different hertz frequencies inside of the body and inside of the neurology, as opposed to when we get into states of, gratitude, love, appreciation, caring, empathy, these types of higher senses of human ethics, human morality, whatever you want to refer to that as. They allow us to interact in a different state with our environment. And if we could just move from ignorance to understanding, from fear to empathy, then I think that we have the greatest chance possible of being able to live happy, healthy, collectively well lives. I think that that really is the basis of health. And it comes back to what you were talking about: responsibility for absolutely every aspect of your own creation. Nobody owes it to you to take care of you, to be here, to do anything. The fact that maybe you didn't ask directly to come into creation, but the fact that you're here means that you have the responsibility to take care of yourself and to steward all life forms that you need during the course of your lifetime to the best of your capacity. And that doesn't mean, oh, I have to keep all of my own chickens and all of my own cattle. If there are individuals who are passionate about that, who will do that, that you can provide equivalent exchange with to some degree, right? Whether that's through monetary currency or providing, you're a cobbler, you'll make shoes out of the hide that they provide you from the animals that they keep and butcher and whatever. Like, there's lots of different ways of doing this. And there's so many models, anthropologically speaking, of creating those systems. But it comes back almost to a sense of neo-tribalism, because once you get bigger than a tribe, human beings cannot effectively govern themselves. When we get to the size of nations, okay, Canada's second largest landmass on the entire planet, and luckily only about the population of California. That's fantastic. When you start getting into huge land masses like the United States, fifth largest landmass or something, sixth largest landmass, and enormously dense populations, that gets really hard. We can't control ourselves very well, even on a state government level, because nobody has the same ideals and values from location to location to location. And some of that is driven by diversity. Let's not even call it diversity, let's call it adversity of religious preference. And so we're not all homogenous inside of our tribes. And so we are so different. We don't have collective values. We don't have collective connection with the earth or the pockets thereof that we live upon. And I think that this really is at the source of it all, probably the rootiest root of the causation of human unwellness, and probably always has been, is the breaking away of small tribalism to the concepts of mass government. And we start to see the diseases that existed inside of Mesopotamia, for instance. We start to see the same things that happen inside of Egypt and Greece and Rome. Rome is perhaps one of the greatest examples. You spread so far, you try and govern so many people, not only is there resistance and you can't homogenize them all, but you spread out too far, you're going to bring diseases back. And they fell as a result of that. So I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts based on what you were saying.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I think we kind of develop the opposite way. So I kind of think of, like, if I'm speaking more psychologically, and it's always tied into the physical and spiritual realms as well, but you kind of start with your at the bottom with instinct, right? And then you kind of build up, like, as from an individual standpoint, and you get more collective as you go. So at the very top you have globalism, then you have like nationalism, so nations, and then you have your state or province, and then your city. And so we kind of push global problems onto people. And so when you start with addressing the global issues, I think that's where you see psychological problems too, because you're talking about, everyone cares only about climate change, but nobody cares about their own financial problems or their own relationship problems or their own health problems, right? They care about this global issue because it's like that's what everyone cares about, right? That's what the collective needs. That's what and that's what people self-sacrifice for the collective. And sacrifice is very important. It is important. But if you don't have perfect health, not even perfect, if you don't have health and you don't have mental health and you don't have a spiritual connection and if you're not living, if you're not taking care of yourself, you cannot take care of others.
Yeah.
And we're starting at the very top. It's not even like, you know, I'm sacrificing myself for my fiance, which I do all the time, but I can't start with that. But that's like a sliver of a challenge compared to sacrificing myself for climate change, right? It's like I
Yeah.
can sacrifice
Yeah.
myself and take care of my family, and I can sacrifice myself and take care of my community when need be, as long as I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult for me to sacrifice myself for on the global scale. So, and I like what you're saying there, how it's like, how you're looking at things like, is this the root cause of disease? And I think that's super interesting. And I feel like, when I really dig deep and try to find the root cause, I find it a lot of times it comes down to greed. And I think it fits into what you're saying because as you get away from the kind of, communal, tribal trade and, I'll take care of you, you're taking care of me, I make shoes and you're producing food. I need food and you need shoes. This is a great relationship. As you get away from that, right? And it's the shoe guy now wants to just sell shoes to everybody, and
Yep.
he's making a little more money than the rest of them because everybody needs shoes, or someone's buying the beef and then they're selling the beef and they're taking their cut, and this is what happens as it grows larger, right? You have these kind of centralized people selling things like you have like the Walmart and the superstore and the grocery store, I should say. And now you have these central, places
Yeah.
where yeah, people work there, but there's always that guy. It's like it becomes too much of a hierarchy. And hierarchy is seen in nature, it is very obvious that that plays a
Yes.
role, but there's a certain humility that needs to be taken if you are at the top of your tribe, right? It's like, yeah, you're gonna be one killing the moose, but if you're just gonna take it for yourself, like that's greedy, right? And that
Yeah.
you're gonna starve the rest of there needs to be a certain sense of humility, which is totally lost now. The richest people in the world, like the richest known people in the world, I guess. And even the richest people who really kind of are behind everything, like there's no humility there. There's no care for the lower class because they
Yeah.
can't exist without there being the lower class. They can't exist without poverty. The ultra rich cannot exist without poverty.
Exactly.
Everyone's always going to do a little bit better. Some people will do better, some people do worse. Like that's the
Right.
throes of life. But when it gets down to it, it's like, you know, too much greed is not good. And even greed, like it's like, is there even a balance with greed? It's like if I'm gonna be like and I'll be open here, a little self-disclosure, but I by nature am a very greedy person. I'm very greedy. I am. And because when I went to university, before I kind of had a change of heart and went into psychology, I was going into I wanted to go to dental school and become a dental surgeon because I wanted to have an empire of dental surgery clinics around North America. I wanted to have an empire. I was talking, I wanted billions and I wanted it all, right?
Right.
I wanted it all. Very, very greedy. Greed does drive my purpose. I don't necessarily like it's hard and it's maybe there are deeper problems here, but when I really look at myself truthfully, it's like, I want to do something, but I want to also be taken care of properly. Like it's like with anything I do, and the podcast is a great thing, right? Because I need to supplement a lot of like um charity. The podcast I've done, I don't want anything for it. I don't want anything for it. I want to give people information and all this stuff. So that's like a good thing for me to do. But it's like when I work, I work for money and it drives me to work. It's like I'll go and do hard labor. I'll go fish lobster and I'll go farm and I'll go, plant
Yeah.
trees, but I want to make money. Now, I'm a very greedy person. I promise you this. I promise you that I am by nature. I really have assessed myself, and but it's like finding that balance. Like if I was in a a more tribal situation, I want to be the one that has it all, but I also want to be the one that shares it all. That's the part that's lost. Even though I want to have it all, I want to share it all. And I feel like I can relate to these people who are at the top and ultra rich because that is what I wanted. I used to want that. So I used to think
Yeah.
like that because I was gonna get it if the whole COVID, and this is why everything's written, right? Everything is perfect. Because through
Yes.
COVID, I found that, it's like that's meaningless, right? Having everything is absolutely meaningless. But it's like if they have everything and they share everything, that's really good. Like look at, and this is a funny one for the younger people on the YouTube and stuff, like Mr. Beast, right? He's that guy because he has a lot of power and he has a lot of money. And I watched a video of his, and I don't watch all his videos. I watched one video of his recently, and it was like he built 100 wells in Africa, right? And when you listen to it, like he did that, right? That's great. If I had a lot of money, that's what I would want to do. Build wells in Africa. That's great. I love that. So, but he's a guy. He's the guy. He's a guy who has a lot, but shares a lot. Shares everything in all of his interviews. He always says that, like he's broke. He has no money, and like he doesn't flex anything. He's got like the plain old clothes on and everything. He's not out here with the Louis Vuitton and all these
Uh-huh.
designers and stuff, right? And so, but I do think it really like and to tie it all back. Even though by nature I'm a greedy person, I'll say this. I feel like it always comes down to greed, and maybe I should actually expand on that just a little bit here. You know, the companies, say there's a company that has a plastic, container. Well, the only reason they can't switch to a glass container is because of money,
Yeah.
and it's not like not like Coca-Cola is gonna go under if they switch to glass. I really don't
No,
think
not at
they
all.
are.
No.
But obviously they're not willing to make that sacrifice. And so it's like the local diner who's been using tallow gets bought out by a chain. And well, they switched it all to canola oil. You
Right.
can always kind of find this little greed loophole and everything. And and as it kind of expands, as it kind of gets larger, like you were saying, as we get away from this communal system of this communal self-reliance, this communal reliance, you get away from that and you get more into the greedy people are trying to take it all, and then people who are more concerned about other things don't have anything. They're the have-nots. So I think that relates really well, because greed in nature. It's funny. Okay, I got one more story here. I took a writing or it was an introduction to Mi'kmaq language. The Mi'kmaq is the native people around my location here. So I learned to speak their language actually in university. This was a great course.
That's
Another
rad.
great course that I took. There was no word for jealousy in the Mi'kmaq language. There was no word for jealousy
Wow.
because everyone shared. Everyone had, like, it was always, if you needed a new fur coat, they would make you a new fur coat. But if you didn't need one, you didn't get one, right?
Yeah.
There was no word for jealousy, and not even with like, women or whatever. There was no jealousy whatsoever. Everybody shared, everybody had everything that they needed. Um, when the colonizers came over, that's when they started having to call each other greedy, because guess what? One person got a gun, the other person was greedy, because that make hunting a lot easier, you know?
Yeah.
So that's when greedy, and so they started calling, instead of saying you're greedy, they would say you smell like shit. That's what they would say. Instead of
That-
you're greedy, they would say you smell like shit. So I
oh,
just thought
that's
that was
so
funny. That
perfect.
always
Yeah.
stuck with me.
That I
Yeah.
think that is a really, really important thing. I remember I've done a huge deep dive into the esoteric histories of the world. And when we take a look at that, there's an very interesting book. I think it was Mark Booth was the author. He wrote The Secret History of the World According to like secret societies or something like that. I read that.
Yeah.
I was maybe like 18 or 19 years old. And he talks about like various permutations of consciousness happening from vegetative consciousness of humankind to like an animalistic consciousness of humankind. And we do see animals, we don't see trees, we don't see plants saying, let's hoard resources. What they actually do is they share and distribute resources equally amongst themselves, and they use different symbiotic systems like, you know, fungi and mycelia in order to be able to do this as well as possible. But if you take a look at, say, a wolf and the pack of the wolf, it is like going to be blood, and they will kill you if you don't, in the right order, allow big wolf and then his cubs and whatever else in order to take a bite of the killed animal that they all helped kill. There's a very social and hierarchical thing where they become very angry with each other. We see this in apes, we see this in wolves, we see this in most predatory animals. And so I can kind of, and you can even see this sometimes with bison and ruminant animals, where they will fight for who is going to breed with who, right?
Yeah.
Or whom is going to breed with whom. So we can see that this interesting shift between plant consciousness versus animal consciousness does creep in somewhere to the human paradigm, to the human experience. And I think that greed really is a huge part of it. And, you know, let's lump some the similar vibration things: greed, jealousy, predation, amassing, disproportionate amassing of resources. Now, I think it's perfectly fine that we have things as individuals. I think that having things as individuals drives individuality, and that can be really fantastic. But at the same time, unbridled or unchecked, that creates a massive imbalance. And again, any imbalance creates disease again. So yeah, it's really important. And it's all about our context, right? Because if you and I and your fiance, my wife, say 5 to 7 others have a plot of land that has some forests, some streams, you know, maybe a little pond, a few other things, and our very survival depends on each other doing those things, we're individually going to want to work together for the whole, because we can't do the work with just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people. We need all of us. We need all 10 of us in order to be doing our jobs, in order for this, our livelihood to exist. Once we get outside of, I don't know what the critical number is, but once we get outside of this critical number, now there are going to be the haves and the have-nots, and interests change massively because there's, like, you know, even with a leadership role that is set up to divvy the resources, now you have a disproportionate kind of resource sharing, and that's where kind of greed comes in. So is it a result of us wanting to create civilizations? Because on one hand, it makes life easier. All 10 of us don't always have to be working so hard. But at the same time, it brings in these other elements that it makes us question, what is the balance and how do we attain that balance? I think these are very important things for every individual to be thinking about on an individual level and on a collective level. For me, I want to live maybe not just 10 people, but let's say up to 100 people together, and to be able to steward a decent portion of nature, to have some forests, and to be able to steward animals that are in that forest, to be able to steward you know, lakes and ponds and streams and just different areas. You know, for me, I can't imagine living in an area that isn't mountainous. I would hate it. I don't like non-mountainous areas. I don't like unforested areas. Those are the environments that I am called to be in. And that would be the type of life that I would need to live. If I was on a beach, I would not enjoy that. If I was surrounded by sand and water all the time, for short periods of time, I enjoy it. I love being at sea, but cannot stand being on islands. And the hotter it is, the less I enjoy it. If it's temperate, cool, rainy, foggy, snowy in the winter, like I love deep, deep snow, 15 feet of snow, give it to me all year long. I would love it. But those are the types of environments that I would need to be in, that I feel called to steward. And I think that asking that one question where do you feel most at home? What type of environment do you feel most at home can help to put us back into the state of mind that says, let me go there. Let me find a pocket of earth that I can do this with and to steward. And this has led me into, homesteading and all these other things.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of accountability, a lot
Definitely.
of responsibility, and perhaps more than what I would like, to be perfectly honest. That's why I would like to have a larger group that we'd be able to play with this at. And at our spot in West Virginia, this will be a training ground deep in Appalachia for individuals to be able to come and see what we have to do individually. And then as we invite and, are able to incorporate more of the land and buy out the areas from the lumber companies, which we hope to do at some point. We would like to stop their mass deforestation, which they're doing exclusively just for money. It's coal mining and it's lumber. And if you're not in those things, then you're getting your money from drugs and you're dying really early lives and creating havoc and stuff out there. It's a very, very sad and poor community in that way. What we would like to do is to be able to introduce how we can steward things by bringing back the native plants, the native diversity, and ethically harvesting from those populations as we're stewarding the healthy populations of everything else, because American ginseng has profound value. It's one of the only plants that we know of in the world, period, that can repair damaged telomeres to DNA. But it's been way over harvested for money. You see what I mean? So all of these things about stewardship and ethical use give me the purpose that I want in that land. And that's what drives me, is the stewardship. The money about it, where it goes, all these other things, less important, because I know that just like the sun has its own force that draws, planets or whatever else around it, if I just focus on what my goal is, that will become attractive enough to other individuals that they will find the value in what I have and be able to offer it at fair value. It's always worked that way. When we go back to tribal trading systems of the Native Americans around here, that's exactly what it was. We don't have salmon here, but they definitely have salmon in the Pacific Northwest. Well, that's not true. We have kokanee salmon here, but it's a whole different thing. We don't have ocean breeding salmon. And so they would see multiple times a year people bringing smoked salmon from tribes in the Pacific Northwest into Idaho. Those Idaho tribes would take some of that smoked salmon and bring it down here where we have certain berries and other fruits at more temperate latitudes that we can, drive up to them. And it seems to work in a certain way. So how do we balance our technology and other things? That is a question that we're going to have to encounter another time, because that is a topic all of its own. But I think these are important things for the individual and for the collective to begin considering, because that is at the rootiest root, I think, of most of our problems, psychologically speaking, for sure, and sociologically, absolutely, and more than likely health-wise as well. So those are some of my thoughts on that.
All connected. Yeah. Well, I mean, quick note, like when I learned that language, the Mi'kmaq language, there was the word for like a shirt was abalai, which is for a cotton shirt. There's no cotton up in Nova Scotia.
Right.
So they actually there was quite a distinct trading system going on here where they had access to cotton shirts up in Nova Scotia.
Yes.
Right. So, and the word actually comes from one of the more southern tribes. I don't remember the exact one, but one of the southern languages, I should say. But anyways, yeah. And I went through my phase there where it was like a cabin in the woods. All I wanted was a cabin in the woods. And that's not the answer. It's really not the answer. One thing that humans are is that we're communal. And I think what you're saying is really important. Like Hunter, it's like, can we even put numbers on it? I really doubt it, because I feel like some populations have definitely done better at larger numbers, and some probably do terrible at like small numbers, right? So you got to have the genetic diversity to be able to sustain like breeding, right? So there's that aspect of it. And so I mean, and one thing I'll say is one thing that Jordan Peterson says that I like, and he's quite the character. we won't get into it, but he
like
does
him.
say that as like as institutions or as anything gets very large, right? So like say a government has more, like it gets larger and it has more power, it tends towards tyranny. So, and I really think this is fundamental because, you know, as a tribe becomes really powerful and stronger than all the rest, well, that's when maybe the leader is taking a little bit more, right? And it tends towards tyranny as it gets larger and more powerful, and maybe they overstep on another person's land or whatever it is, right? So it's the same you see with religious institutions. As the church got very, very large, you know, you could certainly see that it was more of a power thing if you're looking at the history of like Italy and all that stuff too, right? Rome, right? Um, you see that the Vatican struggled with, you know, other, so it always tends towards tyranny. And I think this is why you see these systems and these, you know, these massive cities fail and they fall, right? It's like the rise and the fall and the rise and the fall, and it's like you
Yeah.
just see it over time. It always rises up strong and it always collapses. Every single system always collapses, is what we've seen through history, because obviously we have no extremely long-lived cities, like, you know, even if you're looking at ancient history, like even if you're looking at the Mayans and you're looking at the city of gold. Well, we don't really know all that much about the city of gold.
Right.
You know, was there disease in that, you know, in that city? We don't know that either, right? And it's like, so even if you're talking about Babylon or you're talking about all these ancient, you know, even ancient Egypt fell, right? It's
Yeah.
not what it is today. Now, has the wisdom, like parts have stayed alive too, right? Like the wisdom or the, you know, so parts stay alive. And so that's kind of one of the beauties of it, is that hopefully the good always stays alive, right? And so
Hopefully.
we can just kind of keep building and get better and better. But yeah, I think that's why you kind of see the cycle of the rise and fall of civilizations.
It's so true. Well, Liev, we have covered a tremendous amount of stuff. We're near the end of our hour and a half here already, which is
Sure.
mind-blowing to me. I'm definitely going to have you back. I would love to have you as a pretty regular guest because your ideas are just absolutely fantastic. Obviously, we riff really well. I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking about, you know, all of these different types of topics and just be willing to share your authentic ideas with us. What I'd like for you to do now, though, is tell our audience where they can find you, where they can find your podcast and listen to you, and just an open platform for you to kind of plug your work in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, so right now I'm pretty much focusing on the podcast and a little social media. So on Instagram is kind of where I mainly post for social media. It's beyond.terrain. And the podcast is called Beyond Terrain. It's on all the major podcasting platforms, and it's on YouTube and BitChute and Rumble, whatever you listen to it. It's definitely on there. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing now. Yeah, you can see it here. That's it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty much that for now. I have some plans for the future and where I want to take things, and obviously when I get out of school, it'll be a little different too. Probably start working one-on-one with people, but at this time, it's all about the podcast. So really, that's the best way to support me.
Perfect. Well, that sounds absolutely good. Again, for everybody who's out there, we'll have links down in the description to his Insta as well as to the YouTube channel. You can also find this on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, like, you know, all the different places that podcasts are at. He's been at it for about 3 months. It's a relatively new thing. It's really, really awesome, though. You know, he invited me to be a guest, as many of you might know. I started watching one of his videos, and within 5 minutes, I told Rebecca, get back to him and say, absolutely, yes, I love what he's doing. So if you're interested in hearing good, awesome, cool, authentic ideas, not only from Liev himself, but of course, from a number of other guests that he has on, I strongly promote it. So that is, my 2 cents on the matter. Cool. Again,
Yeah, and I'd love to come back on. This was a great discussion. We could have taken this so many different ways. So, you know, I would love to chat again. This would be fantastic.
Likewise, brother. Likewise. And Liev, again, thank you so much for all of your time today and all of your authenticity and your great thoughts. And like, I just appreciate the hell out of you, brother.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you as well.
Cool. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you again for listening to the Alchemi-Culture Podcast. If you like this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, hit that little bell notification if you're watching or listening on YouTube or YouTube Music. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple, all of the other platforms. So be sure to share this podcast with other people. We discuss so many great ideas here that I know so many people would probably benefit from listening to, even if they don't do anything with it. Just listening to it can begin to plant seeds that I think are really, really important. So please be sure to share this with as many as you can, put it on your socials, etc. If you liked it, if you didn't, go ahead and let us know why. What did we talk about? What did we not talk about that was short-sighted or otherwise, and help us grow, because we're always learning and growing as well. And we would love to take your ideas and comments into consideration. So again, everybody, thank you so much for listening. We hope that you have an absolutely fantastic day and that you experience unfettered health. Until next time, my dear friends, many blessings.